Welcome to Transport Topics Radio, live trucking news directly from the offices of Transport Topics in Arlington, Virginia. And now, here's your host, Dan Ronan.
Welcome to the first hour of Transport Topics Radio here on Sirius XM, Channel 146. We always endeavor to bring you the latest news and information direct from the pages of Transport Topics at ttnews.com, bringing you newsmakers and the reporters who cover the stories on Transport Topics. To stay updated with any of these developing stories, visit ttn.ws/radio or follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Transport Topics. And to get more Transport Topics audio content, try our daily briefing, available on Amazon Alexa, Google Assist, Spotify, Google Play, and iHeartRadio. In this first half hour, we'll be joined by Chris Connor. He's the president and CEO of the American Association of Port Authorities. At the bottom of the hour, Mike Steenhoek joins us. He's the president and CEO of the Soy Transportation Coalition, and we'll discuss with Mike the importance of the trucking industry when it comes to farming. But first, our conversation with Chris Connor. Chris Connor, the president and CEO of the American Association of Port Authorities, joins us from Washington, D.C. Chris, good to have you on the broadcast. Let's look a little bit backwards, if you will, and start with the just recently completed holiday shopping season. A very busy time for retailers across the country, record numbers in terms of sales, both online and also at the traditional brick and mortar stores. How did the ports do during this period between October and even into the refund season into January? How did they do?
They moved a hell of a lot of freight. The contrary to the narrative that was, being put out there, over the fall, the Grinch did not steal Christmas. More freight than ever moved through U.S. ports. And it was, according to the National Retailers Federation, the NRF, the trade association for many of the largest retailers in our country, it was the most successful holiday sales season ever. So how did the ports do? Despite some of the systemic challenges, which we can chat about and we have chatted about in the past, a lot of good things obviously happened to get that much cargo through the ports onto store shelves and resulting in sales.
Now, John Picari, who you know well, the port envoy from the White House, and I imagine someone you talk to on a fairly regular basis, Mr. Picari says that what we just experienced should be viewed as the floor, not the ceiling, in terms of growth at the ports. Los Angeles and Long Beach moved more than 20 million containers this past year. Savannah, almost 750,000 more containers than they did just a couple of years ago, over 5.5 million. All of the other ports reporting enormous numbers. How are we going to do this going forward? Because every day from now on, it seems as though that's going to be November the 5th, November the 8th, November the 22nd in terms of volume like we just experienced over Christmas.
Yeah, so I John's frame of reference, I think, is in part from Department of Transportation's own study recently released during the month of December from the Bureau of Transportation Statistics that says that freight activity in the U.S. between now and the year 2050 is going to grow by, and I forget if the number was 40 or 50%, but a big number. So I think that's where, when he says, today's volumes are the floor, there's going to be continued growth. The good news is we, the port industry, did, at least by historic terms, pretty well in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was signed by the president on November 15th. More money, at least over the next 5 years, is being directed towards ports than ever before. And while you won't see the results of that funding today, tomorrow, or not even next month, but over the next year to 2 years, we're going to start to see the benefits of improved intermodal connectivity, more resilient port infrastructure, able to cope with these ever increasing volumes. So I think that, so money, federal money, in the case of California and maybe other states as we go forward, putting in state money, coupled with changes to the operating model. For example, longer port and terminal operating hours, and customers that take advantage of those longer terminal operating hours and actually, get trucks in and out during the night shifts. That's how we're going to do it.
And that's a great point that you mentioned about California, because 17.2 billion is an awful lot of money, no question about it. But Governor Newsom out there recently announced that the state, which has an enormous budget surplus, is going to be putting a lot of state money into Long Beach and Los Angeles and Oakland and the like. And the state money ultimately may be more important than the federal money, I would imagine.
Well, it will certainly be divvied up against fewer ports than in the federal context. But the in the bill, it's been often stated 17 billion was for ports. A little bit of not a misnomer, but when you break that number down, about 5.5 billion was for seaports, and the balance was for other ports of entry. So Customs and Border Patrol type stuff, airports, land ports, et cetera, et cetera. But even $5.5 billion is epic when compared with history over the last generation or so. So we're encouraged. We'd like to, begin conversations with Congress about a longer term sustained investment program so that we in this country, we treat our port system like national economic treasures, which they are, like many of our global competitors like China already do.
And there are some very interesting things going on, Chris, on a much smaller scale, but very interesting, I think is the best way to describe it, such as in Cairo, Illinois, down at the confluence of the Mississippi and the Ohio rivers there, with plans to build a port there to bring barge traffic for agricultural products down the Mississippi. Plaquemines Port in Louisiana, Sandy Sanders and his group have got some big plans on the table there. These are innovative plans that probably should have been looked at 10, 15, 20 years ago, but here they are now. Any thoughts on some of these ideas?
I think we're, as a country, we're great in a crisis, right? And that's where I think our best innovative capabilities really show through. And the things you mentioned are good examples of turning crisis into opportunity and creating a more diversified distribution scheme for goods flowing in or out or within our country's borders. There's other examples too. One of the short-term things that's been put in place here is so-called pop-up container yards. These are most prevalent in the Southeast with the Georgia Ports Authority. And what they basically have done is set up 4 or 5 sites where cargo is moving right from the ship and being trucked to off-dock facilities to get it away from the congested marine terminal area and get it into a more open environment where rail carriers or truckers can come in at a higher pace and not have to wait in line like they do at the port and move more goods through the system that way. So I like a lot of the creativity that we're starting to see, and I think we're going to see more of it.
Another one of those proposals that is also more than on the drawing board that's already started is, as you know, is out in Utah, out in the Salt Lake City area near the airport there, with rail lines from Long Beach and Los Angeles, and also Seattle and Oakland. They can move some of that cargo out of that very valuable real estate near the marine terminals and bring it 850 miles inland, closer to the Midwest and the Southeast and the other places where a lot of this cargo is going.
Yeah, I'm proud to say that the Utah Inland Port is one of our newest members at AAPA, and we're delighted to have them. And I think that's a great concept. And, think about if you're a trucker, instead of picking up a box in LA, in Long Beach, and in the environment and community that those 2 ports sit, and instead being able to pick it up at a facility near Salt Lake and then delivering it to its final destination, you're going to probably get a happier, more content trucking industry with these kind of alternative arrangements where the cargo is just moving away from the concentrated marine terminal environment into a more accessible environment. I think it's a great step.
Chris Connor, the president and CEO of the American Association of Port Authorities, joining us on the Newsmaker line. This is Transport Topics Radio, Sirius XM Channel 146.
This is Transport Topics Radio with your host, Dan Ronan.
We're back on Transport Topics Radio here on Sirius XM, channel 146 with Chris Connor. He's the president and CEO of the American Association of Port Authorities, and it is the organization that lobbies and does a lot of the legwork in Washington, D.C. on behalf of the nation's ports. Chris, there's a big story at ttnews.com concerning the Port of Oakland, and they recently worked something out with the United States Department of Agriculture to designate one of these pop-up ports that you were talking about in the first segment. This is going to be 22 acres specifically for agricultural exports. Now, at a time when Long Beach and Los Angeles have seen their container volume surge, just the opposite was happening at Oakland because of some real changes within the shipping industry. Any thoughts on what Oakland is doing to try and develop more of a niche for their products in terms of agricultural exports?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of sensitivity, and understandably so, about the treatment of U.S. exporters during this particular pandemic, where accusations and in some cases verification that ocean carriers are choosing to load empties instead of dispatching equipment out to interior points in the U.S. so that U.S. manufacturers can load their goods and compete overseas. So I think from the White House on down, there's a strong desire to help advantage U.S. exporters in the global marketplace. I think what Oakland's doing is a cool idea, a smart idea. They're trying to do their part. I think the U.S. Department of Agriculture is stepping up with some of their credit capabilities to help, pay for some of the infrastructure adjustments that need to be set up in order to make this a reality. And in fact, we're going to be hosting a webinar with some parties from the administration in order to promote that concept and see what interest there might be from other U.S. ports in following suit.
So this could be something that could be replicated, it sounds like, assuming that the Oakland project is successful. And by all accounts, it will be in some point, some form or another.
Exactly.
And Oakland's in a unique situation because it already had a reputation of being a strong export port, especially for agriculture. And most people probably don't think as Oakland of being an agricultural area, but it's located in Central California, which of course is a very rich agricultural sector of the United States. And it has two direct rail lines to the Midwest that go into the Port of Oakland. And if you are looking to export pork and beef and other frozen type protein to China and Asia, Oakland's the place to be, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they have a great strategic geographic location. And I think one of the things that was happening throughout the supply chain crisis was that carriers that normally had Oakland on their itinerary were omitting it and discharging Oakland cargo in LA or Long Beach and spinning around and going back to Asia because, of course, and they were already waiting a certain number of days beyond what they had expected in order to discharge the cargo there and didn't feel they could, burn any more time. Obviously, this had negative impact on Oakland, and I think they're wise to prioritize export cargo, and I believe it will pay off in the short, medium, and long term for them.
Chris, well, we talked in the first segment about this money that is going to be in the infrastructure bill signed by Mr. Biden. Most of the ports are run in one form or another by state or regional governmental authorities. What work do you see that needs to be done now and really looked at in terms of long-term planning? What needs to be done now? I know that ports like Houston are widening their shipping channels. Savannah is undertaking an enormous development program there. Charleston is doing the same thing. Are all of these projects that are taking place now, are they enough so that when we hit 2030, 2035, we have the capacity in place to handle what's coming?
Yeah, I think, on the dredging, I think it's really important that we continue to widen and deepen gateways around the country so that, the largest container ships, which, as you know, there are many significantly large container ships trading, and the more ports that they have access to, it's going to minimize the congestion issue that currently exists when they can only go to a certain number of deep water ports that are deep and wide enough. So I think in terms of diversifying cargo entry and exit points, the dredging and widening is critical.
I think one of the things that has been underreported in just terms of the overall economy with regards to the size of these ships that we're talking about was the decision several years ago to widen and expand the Panama Canal. This has opened up an entirely new area of business in terms of shipping and being able to move through that canal, this historic canal that goes all the way back 100 or so years, the biggest of the biggest ships. I mean, ships that can handle 14, 15, 16,000
Yes.
containers.
No doubt. And I think, again, the money, the Army Corps of Engineer money for deepening and widening is going to enable more ports on both coasts, but particularly on the East Coast, because the difference of the existing God-given by nature aspects of those port facilities is going to allow more ports to handle the largest of these ships and be able to more evenly distribute and diversify ports of discharge.
What are we going to be looking at over the next several years in terms of getting through this? Because we're going to be looking at 20, 21, 22 million TEUs at Long Beach and Los Angeles, 9, 10 million in New York, New Jersey, 6, 7 million in Savannah. What are we going to be looking at? And I guess all of this goes back to, in one form or another, what we were just starting to talk about 2 years ago, which was COVID, that the surge of imports that have been coming into this country has just been nothing short of astounding.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I don't see it retreating. And again, referencing the DOT's own study, there's economic studies out there to suggest freight activity is going to grow significantly over the next 20 to 25 years. So these investments in our port infrastructure that are part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, it has a 5-year funding scenario. We really need to convince Congress to take a much longer look out over the horizon and make sustained investments. Because if, as you mentioned earlier, Dan, if this is the floor, then we need a much more resilient port and intermodal connectivity system in order to accommodate that surge. What I was thinking about before that's relevant to this question is in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, it also called for the creation of an office, a new office inside of DOT called the Office of Multimodal Freight Policy. And I look forward to seeing how that plays out in the hopes that we might be moving towards a more coherent, federal strategic look at our port and infrastructure system. As you mentioned, we are, public port agencies are parts of municipalities, counties, or states, unlike some of the countries we compete with globally in trade, like China, which are purviews of the federal government. I think it's way too late to reverse that course, but I think we need to recognize the way we're set up and plan, strategize, and invest accordingly.
Chris, we could do an entire broadcast on the next question that I'm going to talk with you about, and it's probably unfair just to spend 3 minutes discussing this. But there are a lot of things that are taking place at the ports with regards to the environment, the electrification of the drayage industry. Talk to me about how the ports need to be and are working to be good stewards of the environment as all of these economic developments take place.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They are, they are citizens of the communities that they work in, and therefore very sensitive towards the environmental impacts of the business of ports. We've done I wouldn't call it a 100% scientific analysis, but I would say it's a strong desktop analysis of what it would take to fully electrify the U.S. port industry. And I mean by that, port handling equipment of all types, as well as, port drayage equipment for moving freight in and around ports. And we're talking, $50 billion plus. So, way more money that's included in this bipartisan infrastructure bill. And, not that the ports are expecting the government's going to fund that tab, but it would be nice to see some federal programs that can draw in private sector partners into starting to make this a reality. It has to happen. I believe it will happen, but I hope we don't wait too long before we get really serious about it.
Got about a minute and a half left before we wrap things up. Chris, take a moment and talk about the work that's been done by the men and women, the longshoremen, the drayage drivers, the others, these last 2 years of dealing with this pandemic, which has been so devastating to the country. Talk about the work that they've done, the frontline workers.
Yeah, incredible. It doesn't get said often enough. I think these folks must be exhausted because they've really answered the call time and time again. And, this persistent virus, just won't go away. Um, Obviously, as I speak with you today, there are some encouraging signs, about the trends, but it keeps rearing its head, therefore putting more strains, on the workforce, meaning less folks on the job, putting more strains on those who are able to answer the call and go to work. So my hats, I tip my hat to all of them. I think labor, truckers, rail have been amazing throughout this, and the broader narrative says the system is failing. I think, yes, the system is flawed and it needs attention and it needs funding. But I think the men and women who work in the industry have been amazing. And, I would only refer again to the data point that I gave you from the NRF that Christmas 2021 was the most successful holiday sales season ever.
Chris Connor, the final word, joining us from Washington, D.C. He's the president and CEO of the American Association of Port Authorities. This is Transport Topics Radio, Sirius XM Channel 146.